Okay, this lecture is how to improve your immune system, part 2. So we're going to start out with the rage reaction of sympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is SANS, S-A-N-S. Parasympathetic nervous system is PANS, parasympathetic autonomic nervous system. And basically it's an accelerator and a brake. The accelerator is sympathetic, and that means like a fight or flight reaction. Rage reaction is another name for fight or flight reaction. Some people even call it the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. So this guy looks kind of pissed off. This has also been described as a metaphor for teaching medical students is being chased by a tiger in the dark. So his pupils open up wide to be able to see better at night. He's got his fist ready to fight. He's got all his blood flowing maximum to his muscles so he can physically do anything he needs to do to survive the next 15 or 10 minutes. So fight or flight is based on a short, acute physical stress like our ancestors being chased by a predator, lions and tigers and bears. So you need all your physical energy to do whatever you got to do the next 5 minutes. Pick up a stick and fight the predatory animal, climb a tree, whatever you got to do. Okay, at that time, you don't care about your immune system. You're not worried about fighting an infection for the next 20 minutes. You're not worried about digesting your food for the next 20 minutes. You're not, chasing your girlfriend in the next 20 minutes. You just want to survive. So basically, all that other stuff is shut off because the body has limited resources. In order to maximize muscular effort, it shuts down blood flow to the gut. It turns off the immune system. And that way, all of its glucose in the blood can be concentrated towards the physical effort needed to survive the next 20 minutes. So the problem is in the modern world, people often have severe ongoing psychological stresses which keep their immune system shut off for a prolonged amount of time. And that increases their risk of getting an infection. It also increases their risk of cancer. So you don't want to be high stressed all the time because then you will have a weak immune system. Learning how to mellow yourself out and take it easy is beneficial for your health. You're going to sleep better. If you're too stressed out, you don't sleep as well. You don't sleep as deep. Insomnia, lack of sleep, worsens your ability to heal. It weakens your immune system. Okay, now here is the midline of the brain, the edge of the brain, the medial edge. It's called the limbic system, and it's really shaped like like the letter C, typically like the Chicago Bears C on their football player helmet. Okay, and the main thing to know is that this right here is a cingulate gyrus, and these fibers run in a circle like the Chicago Bears letter C football helmet, and there's something called the isthmus that keeps them in continuity with the medial temporal lobe, medial temporal gyrus here, and with the hippocampus. Okay, this thing right here is a hippocampus. It kind of looks a little bit like a big purple foot, and it's right next to this thing right here that looks like an almond called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the fear center. The amygdala is always worried. The amygdala is a nervous Nelly. And so it's like, oh my God, I think that person's following me. Oh my God, this looks dangerous. Oh my God, we shouldn't go there. Uh-oh, is the lions and tigers and bears coming towards me? So the amygdala is always worried. And what that's happening is the amygdala is sending a message into the hypothalamus to be afraid, to be stressed out, to be ready for a physical reaction. Actually, let me go back to that last picture one more time because it'll make a little more sense. Okay, I meant to go a little more into this right here. This is the hypothalamus. It is the control center for the autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, again, has an accelerator and a brake. SANS is the accelerator, meaning sympathetic. That's fight or flight. And the other side of it is PANS, parasympathetic. Parasympathetic can be remembered by feed and breed, rest and digest. So basically, you'd like to spend as much of your life as you could in a predominantly parasympathetic mode. Feed and breed, rest and digest. Living happily ever after with your girlfriend, just enjoying life, okay? But unfortunately, a lot of times we're stressed out. We got to get a lot of work done fast, or there's actually some physical danger or threat, perhaps, even. All right, so anyways, this idea of controlling the hypothalamus, the headquarters, central control of the autonomic nervous system is a very important component of understanding how to manage stress and just health in general. It's useful to know. Okay, now just in more detail, as we discussed, the limbic system is the connection between the medial temporal lobe and the hypothalamus. Okay, and actually this cingulate gyrus right here, I'm going to show another picture of it on a coronal image in just a moment, is the key gyrus for the default mode network, which is how we time travel from past to future in our thoughts. Okay, I'll go through that in just a moment. But you want to remember that the amygdala is the fear center. That's important to know. Okay. Now here are the three main networks of the brain. These, when I say networks, I mean groups of neurons that work together. This right here is a cingulate gyrus. I actually wrote the name for it in where the corpus callosum is. Corpus callosum has fibers going side to side. Cingulate has fibers going like that letter C from front to back. Okay, well this cingulate gyrus right here, that's what determines how the brain time travels from past to future, past to future. And the typical scenario will mean, let's say it's a guy, if you put him on a functional MRI table, tell him to close their eyes, and you just talk to him, you go, so what you thinking about it? The usual thing they're going to tell you is they're thinking about some social relationship, whatever it might be. Let's say they're thinking about their girlfriend, saying, gee, Betty wanted to go to a movie yesterday, but I told her I couldn't go because I had to study. But, I'll make it out to her. We'll go this weekend. Okay, so that's typical default network thinking, that you go from a past experience and then you have a future plan on how to improve a situation, whatever it might be. And typically we most often think about our social relationships. So that is how the brain time travels from past to future with the default mode network. Now, a different network is on the outer surface of the brain. It's called the convexities because they're convex outward, and that is the task-based network. The task-based network for time travel really is just to keep you in the present. Focus on whatever you're doing at that moment. Doing your job, doing your school, whatever activity you're engaged in. Now, there's one other network you need to know about. This one's called the salience network. It's really like the insular cortex region right here. Insula is sort of this gray matter right here. The point about the salience network is it keeps you to at least a little bit pay attention to your environment. So imagine you're sitting down, you're trying to study, and the TV is on just off to your side a little bit. In the outer periphery of your eyeballs, you have a lot of rods for black and white vision, and they're very good at motion detection. So when they notice the motion of the TV, you can't help but turn your head to look at it because that's how our brain's designed. Eyeballs with peripheral motion detectors, black and white, and when we sense motion, we turn our head to look at the thing so we can get both eyes focused on it. Then we get the benefit of the highest focal point of our vision, which is in the center, the macula, called the fovea, where there's a concentration of cones for color vision, and they're closely concentrated for very high resolution vision. So basically, you look at the thing with both eyes so you can figure out what it is. With both eyes, you have good depth perception as well. And that's how the brain works. And it just makes sense because that's what keeps you alive. You have to be able to pay attention to motion because motion could potentially be danger. All right, so those are the three major networks of brain cells as grouped together, and how we time travel from present alternatively to past and future. Okay. Now, a little more about the immune system here. These are the lymphatics, the stuff in green. Here's an artery in red. Blood flow comes into a capillary, and then it exits through the vein. During that time, a little bit of fluid leaks out, and some cells will sometimes leak out as well. Those then drain into the lymphatics. And the lymphatics are basically like a sewer system, a sewage system. Okay, but the unique thing here is we know the heart is connected to the artery, so it's pumping the blood under pressure, and that pressure continues through the capillary, and there's also some pressure that goes into the vein, which helps return the blood to the heart. But there's no heart connected to the lymphatic system. That's a very important point. The lymphatics are not connected to the heart. And this is going to make a real important point that in order to get the lymphatics to flow better, you need to exercise. When you exercise, that pushes the lymphatic fluid around. So the lymphatic is sort of a little bit of a sewage dump of extra fluid, that extracellular fluid that leaked out from the capillaries. Also, your white blood cells travel in the lymphatics. And that's really important. So that exercise gets the lymphatic fluid moving faster. It gets your white blood cells moving faster throughout those lymphatics so they can run around and do their job. Your white blood cells' job is to remove cancer cells and to remove infection cells. By exercising, you move them along a lot faster so they can do what they need to do, remove cancer cells and remove infections. Okay, and they interact with each other like through Braille. It's like speed reading of Braille. So they need to be moving around fast so they make all those contacts, because I'll show you in the next slide what that really means. But the bottom line is you want to stay warm to improve immune function because that speeds up the motion of your lymphocytes. That's why you get it. That's one of the reasons why you get a fever when you're fighting a big infection. And in addition, you want to exercise to the extent you can, because that speed, just on a daily basis, that speeds up the immune system so it can remove cancer cells and can also remove infection cells. Okay, here's a little bit about how the immune system is set up in most locations in the body. There's some type of lining of cells. In most areas, it's just a single layer thick. Single layer thick, the name for it, the medical term is simple. On the skin, though, you'll have multiple layers. That's called stratified. But in general, it's a simple layer. I put EC here because EC works for almost all the epithelial surfaces. E itself can be epithelial surface, like for your skin, for your gut, for your blood vessels, for your lungs. E in the gut can also be enterocytes. Entero means enteric tract because the gut's called enteric tract. Cyte just means cells. So EC for enterocytes. Inside of arteries, the lining cells are called endothelial cells. So again, EC works as this abbreviation in all the lining cells. In between the lining cells, you have TJs. TJs are tight junctions, and that means nothing is going to get from this side to this side unless the endothelial cell wants it to. All right. The center of a hollow organ, like the intestinal tract, the gut, is called the lumen. Okay. Also inside an artery, the center of a hollow organ, a blood vessel, is the lumen. And the side of the endothelial cell, epithelial cell, enterocyte that faces the lumen is called the luminal side or the apical side. On the opposite side, that's called the basal side. And when you're beneath the tight junctions, you can also call it the lateral side. Together, you can call them basolateral. So the basolateral sides of or surfaces of the endothelial cells, this is where they are. Typically, the endothelial cells will be connected to some connective tissue called the basement membrane, and that's connected to more connective tissue that's called the extracellular matrix. So the basement membrane anchors the endothelial cells so they don't, move out of position. And you'll need to know that because this will become markedly thickened in diabetes, which is going to cause problems for the function of whatever organ you're working with. Okay, and then these are the organ cells. So these are like the individual liver cells that do what a liver does, or that do whatever a pancreas does, a spleen does, or whatever organ you're working with. Okay, so this is the physical barrier, all right? And then down in this area, there's going to be a bunch of immune cells, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Okay, so here's more detail, and this is pretty much a summary of how the whole immune system works. The main two parts are what's called innate immunity. That means you're born with it, and it's a fixed thing. And then there's adaptive immunity. So innate immunity is always there. It's largely a barrier. We just talked about this barrier of the epithelial cells. And then there's some sort of simple, almost a little bit primitive blood cells. Like the NP is the neutrophil. It's also called polysegmented neutrophil, PMNs. The monocyte is these guys that almost look like a little smiley face. And once they go into the subepithelial space, they can turn into macrophages. They get bigger once they turn into macrophages. And you don't want them so big while they're floating around in the blood. It'll plug up your capillaries. Because you can remember already, a red blood cell is about 7 microns, capillaries about 5 microns, and neutrophils are about twice that size. And, macrophages are even bigger. So you don't want too big of a cell floating in your blood. Okay, there's also guys, so you can call them almost like tanks because they're really big cells, relatively speaking, these neutrophils and monocytes. And then you've got littler things called complement proteins. We're not going to get into that right now, but you can almost think of them as foot soldier grunts, okay? But they're almost like this army circulating in your blood. And they're just, driving around doing their business, not really paying attention to anything. But what's going to happen is, if you get a breach in your endothelial cells and through the tight junction like we have here, a breach means a hole, a gap, a broken tight junction, bacteria might start flooding into the subepithelial space. And then you're going to have these guys here. They sit around waiting for trouble. These are the guards, the guard cells. They're sometimes called the sentries. Very often they're called sentinel cells. The classic example right here is dendritic cell. And it's a little bit like a Pac-Man, meaning that it can eat the bad guys. It can eat the bacteria. The way it works is it has something on its surface called PRR. PRR means pattern recognition receptors. And they can recognize characteristic molecules on the outer surface of a bacteria that do not belong in the human body. They know that those are foreign from the human body, that they should never be present in the human body. And that could be something like the LPS, lipopolysaccharide on a gram-negative bacteria. LPS is its endotoxin. It could be LTA, lipoteichoic acid. That's the endotoxin of a gram-positive bacteria. So anyways, when it senses one of these chemicals, and these chemicals, by the way, are called MAMPs or PAMPs. MAMPs means microbial associated molecular patterns. PAMPs means pathogen-associated molecular pattern. Pathogen just means disease-causing. There's also another one called DAMPs. DAMPs means damage-associated molecular patterns. Like if you have a cell that's damaged and it needs to be removed. Okay, so anyways, That's how these antigen presenting cells work. These dendritic cells is they first recognize a foreign molecule that does not belong. They then ingest the bacteria, that's called phagocytosis, to ingest it inside themselves. And what they're going to do, once they ingest it inside themselves, they're going to chop it up into little protein pieces, and they're actually then going to stick those on their outer surface here. So this is what it's going to look like when it's taken those little pieces of the bacteria and stuck them on its outer surface. There's a reason why it does that. I'll explain that in just one moment. So once it eats one of these bacteria, it says, uh-oh, looks like the you-know-what hit the fan. It does two things. It releases certain things called cytokines. Cyto means cell, kine means to move. An alarm system to get these other, the floating army in the blood to move into this area. Because the guard cell by itself, there's not too many of these dendritic cells in the subepithelial space. So when the bacteria flooding in, they're going to overwhelm this relatively solitary security guard, okay? So he's like, oh shit, we got an emergency here. So it sends the cytokine alarm, and then it jumps into the lymphatic, the adjacent lymphatic. And this cell here, the dendritic cell it's most often called, will travel through the lymphatic until it reaches a lymph node. When it gets to the lymph node, it's kind of like Paul Revere saying, wake up, everybody, wake up, we got an emergency on our hands. Bacteria are invading. They're already in the subepithelial space. I ate one of them, and then I put the pieces of them on my outer surface. The reason it puts pieces of them on its outer surface is it's searching for a lymphocyte that will match, that will have a binding capacity of, a T cell receptor, TCR, that will bind to the antigens, meaning the whatever it is about the bacterial protein that, or lipopolysaccharide that initiates a foreign reaction, okay? So most of the lymphocytes, they're very specialized. They only react with whatever they've got their own pattern recognition immune receptors for. So most of them will not be interested when this antigen presenting cell, this dendritic cell, bounces into the lymph node. They're going to go, screw this, not my job, not my job, not my job, not my job. And that just means they do not have a match for this type of bacteria. So the vast majority of them will not match with this bacteria. And that's why being warm is so important and exercise is so important. This antigen presenting cell, this dendritic cell, it's called antigen presentation to put the antigens from the invading bacteria on their outer surface. That's APC, antigen presenting cell. And what it's doing is it's searching around with all these lymphocytes. Do you got a match? 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 Can you bind this bacteria so you can help me to go back and kill it, to get it out of the subepithelial space? And so this dendritic cell has to bounce around through this lymph node until it finds a lymphocyte that will be activated by this antigen, meaning antigen again, meaning the protein from the bacteria. And what's basically happening is this is all done in Braille. These cells are bouncing off of each other, looking for a match on the antigen on the dendritic cell with the receptor on the lymphocyte. And so this right here is the innate immunity. It doesn't have a memory. It's nonspecific. All it can do is recognize broad categories of invading pathogens. Is it a bacteria? Is it a virus? Is it a parasite? Is it a cancer cell? Is it simply damaged tissue? Okay? And so that's how the innate immunity is, and it'll be the same thing next time if the person's ever again infected by the bacteria. Whereas adaptive immunity is different than that. Adaptive immunity are a bunch of specialists. There's like billions of these lymphocytes, and they can bind to almost anything. But again, the vast majority of them, they're very specialized in what they bind to, so it can take a lot of effort to find one that will bind to the individual currently active pathogen, active bacterial problem. And so again, this is why you want to speed up the ability of this thing to move all over this lymph node, and it's got to find a lymphocyte that's willing to take up the challenge and help it to remove this bacteria from the body. So like I say, they interact with each other essentially by Braille, feeling the proteins and other molecules on each other's surfaces to see if they get a match or not. So this is innate immunity, this is adaptive immunity. And the connector is the dendritic cell. The dendritic cell moves from being part of innate immunity to travel to the lymph node and activate adaptive immunity. So it is the connecting source. The relevance is that all of this stuff happens immediately. This will be initiated instantaneously when a bacteria comes through across that into the subepithelial space, and it will ramp up very rapidly over the course of hours. Versus the adaptive immune system, it might take over a day before this gets its act together and significantly starts effectively fighting the infection. So That's how it works. All right, and then like your defense systems, we talked about the immune system, the innate component, the barrier, the cells, the sentinel guarding cells. That's fighting bacteria and cancer. Then we also have the liver is sort of like the immune system for toxic chemicals. The liver for chemicals. The liver detoxifies chemicals in your blood like toxic drugs, substance abuse, alcohol, whatever it might be. It's a detox system for that. Your autonomic nervous system, in a sense, is your defense system against predatory animals because it goes, oh shit, better get ready to move, go into fight or flight, so you maximize your physical energy to do what you have to do in that situation. And then I kind of am joking here with the last two ones that to fight boredom, you got reading, exercising, and socializing. And then to fight bad behavior and your own thoughts and behavior is remind yourself of Christianity. Love thy neighbor, be nice, be good. So I think that's the last one. Let's see here. And staying in a peaceful mood. I got one more slide here. Staying in a peaceful, positive mood. Whatever it takes to get you into that. Being around people you like, listening to pleasant music like Christian music, thinking positive thoughts, having a purpose in your life, thinking about your goal. Because my goal is to do something really good, I'm not going to let anything, get me upset because I got to focus on my goal. All right, so anyways, here is the intestinal tract. And the key thing I wanted to show you about this was to maintain the intestinal lining intact, you got to eat your dietary fiber because the dietary fiber is used by the good bacteria in your gut to maintain the tight junctions. And not only is it used, the good bacteria convert the dietary fiber from your plant foods. There's no fiber in animal foods. They convert them to short-chain fatty acids, in particular 4-carbon butyrate. 4-carbon butyrate is used by the enterocytes, the epithelial cells, line the intestinal tract to make tight junctions. Okay, and you need these tight junctions to prevent problems. Okay, so you got to eat your fiber. And the brain also has a blood-brain barrier that also uses these butyrates to maintain the blood-brain barrier. So you're not just protecting your gut, you're protecting your brain. You don't want toxins getting into your brain. They can get into your brain tissue if you have leaky blood-brain barrier permeability. Anyways, this list of all these things right here are things that cause leaky gut. So you want to avoid all those things, especially if you have an autoimmune disease, because autoimmune disease can be activated by having a break in your tight junctions whereby large chunks of protein are able to get into the subepithelial space, and they then can activate the immune system. They typically will because they're PAMPs or MAMPs, meaning abnormal molecules. And then sometimes, because the amino acid sequence is relatively similar from an animal food as it is the own proteins inside our own bodies, it'll potentially cross-react with our own bodies. That's called molecular mimicry in the sense that the amino acid sequence on a protein is similar. Amino acid sequence just means amino acids make a protein. They're like beads on a necklace, okay? And it can cross-react with their own body. That's the most common reason for autoimmune disease, like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, for example, lupus, multiple sclerosis, and whatnot. Okay, also the bacteria themselves, as well as the bacterial endotoxins, get across that break in the tight junctions. They can cause inflammation locally, irritation of the gut, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome. If LPS gets into the blood, it's very, very, very prothrombotic, can increase incidence of clotting, in particular a bad type of clotting called amyloidogenic clotting. These bacteria can get into the blood, spread to other locations, and do a lot of damage. So anyways, eat your fiber to prevent this. For the other stuff, we talked about it earlier. Manage your stress. Try to spend as much of your life as you can in parasympathetic. And because if you're stressed out, cortisol shuts off your immune system, so you don't want that. Get your sleep. Your immune system works well while you're asleep. And stay warm and exercise. Both of those things increase circulation of your white blood cells throughout your lymphatic system to prevent infections, to prevent cancer. So hope that was helpful.